Hello, so this is Jean Chandler once again, and I am lucky enough to have sitting right next to me today Christian Trosclair, who's a fencer and martial artist going way back, and one of the principal translators at Wiktenauer, and an extremely creative and active and innovative explorer of history and martial arts and mechanics of the body, and taught me a lot about fencing. And somebody that I'm proud to call a friend, and who's from here in New Orleans, but has absconded to the safety of the far north, where the hurricanes rarely go. Although I did see that y'all got a little brush from a hurricane not too long ago. Yeah. Weather's changing, man.
Yeah,
it could happen that New Orleans will end up like completely safe. And New England will be bombarded with hurricanes. I mean, everything's getting weird.
Sure. I'm in Portland, Maine, and the weather's pretty mild.
It doesn't get like crazy scary. Because when I think of Maine, obviously Stephen King, and then the next thing is like The Thing, like the Arctic Station. Is that what it's like? Is it pretty much like that Arctic Station?
Oddly, no. So when you stay along the coasts, it's mostly the Gulf Stream keeps it more or less warm.
So as long I heard that's going to end though.
Yeah, that's probably going to end, and then it'll be total icebergs the
so it's
whole
like
way down.
It's not like Jack Nicholson at the end of The Shining.
No, not often. Not
okay.
Often.
So in January, like what was it like? What's it like?
Actually, everything's just it doesn't in Portland, Maine. It does not snow altogether too much. The winter's fine. It's really spring. Spring is awful. It is.
It's like constantly raining and stuff.
It is wet. They call it mud season, and it's just the weather is just grim, and it's just everything has an edge to it, and it's just unpleasant.
Okay.
So,
and are there like outbreaks of lawnmowers attacking people or?
I've never made it to the
pyrotechnic
news,
ability.
I'm sure
they cover that shit up.
Yeah.
Have you been to Jerusalem's lawn? Yeah, that's down in Massachusetts. Though,
yeah. So there you go.
Okay, so we didn't come here to talk about the weather. But Christian and I have known each other for a long time, and we were in the same fencing club. And without getting into the long, detailed thing about that, because it's going to have to be short, we had pretty different approaches to understanding fencing, and I veered off into context pretty early, and my fencing was kind of intuitive based. Christian is more responsible and thorough, and he's a translator, and he started translating out of sort of natural inclination, I would say, and also because of his background in dance and everything. I'll let you summarize that.
Sure.
And martial arts from China, really understood and not just guessing like I did. He really got deep into the roots of how this works, and as well as understanding the languages of it and everything. And we had different approaches. We didn't fully understand each other's way of doing this, and we started having lunch periodically, increasingly often, which was probably not great for my career because some of them went like 2 hours. It wasn't that unusual. And we have a shared love of food from places other than the United States. So we would go to all kind of restaurants around New Orleans that were. We had a lot of good Chinese food and Vietnamese and South Asian and everything, Arabic, everything. We went to that Cafe Lebanon is still going strong. It's a Iraqi version of Lebanese version of Greek food or whatever. Good times, and we learned a lot. And I really, my understanding of how to fence really grew. Eventually, at first I couldn't understand anything Christian said, but I learned, and I even picked up some devices from Christian, which is that's a divisive issue. Devices,
right? Yeah, sure.
But a couple of my favorite devices that I actually used in my last couple of tournament fights before I had to give it up for my knees, I got from you directly. That one, like we'll circle back to that.
Sure.
But there's one I particularly really like, and it's a high percentage thing for me, and I love it because it's so deceptive.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we'll come back to that. So my approach has been really about the historical context, because like the manuals just open that up for me so much, and I feel like it's a time tunnel into the 15th, 16th centuries. And Christian's has been really understanding in depth the language. So that's my perception of it. And I've been, since I started these interviews and everything, I've really been wanting to get Christian here, and he's here now, and I'm talking, and should be talking. So
Sure.
your turn.
Yeah. So I'll give you a little curriculum vitae. I am not degreed. Everything I've done is
Team autodidact.
Yeah. So I've done on my own, but before coming into HEMA, which was around 2005, 2006, or it could have been earlier. I don't know. Timelines get twisted.
Oh, HEMA, yeah, that was going to be like shortly after Katrina, so it was like 2006-ish.
Okay.
Late 2006, I'd say probably.
Okay. So, but before then, I was deep into Arthurian legends, the medieval occult, stuff like that. I'd translated sections of the Red Book of Hergest, which was in a medieval Welsh. I just decided that was something that I could do. And so I went down to the Tulane Library. I started bugging medievalists.
They have a great library.
They have a phenomenal library there. They have a few scholars of medieval High German. And
your background in martial arts.
So I've studied a bunch of different things. Bagua Xingyi. I've done capoeira. I've studied classical Indian dance, Bharatanatyam. I've done flamenco and Argentinian tango. I studied. I'm big into music, so I play oud and tambour. I learned.
He really does play the oud. I've heard it.
Yeah. So, I love history. I love language, music, movement, culture, dance, all that stuff. And so, when our mutual friend Robert Starnes introduced us together, that was just like HEMA was all the things I loved wrapped up into one little package.
Yeah, when you were saying that, it just occurred to me like a lot of the like cutting edge theories I'm reading about, from some of our friends in the HEMA world and the researcher community tie so deeply into that. The mini singer and Meister singer tradition is apparently, we think now, like closely connected to the development of the settle, or I'm not sure. That's a position that some friends of ours have floated.
Well, there's literally a thing called a Schulzettel, and one of the uses of a Schulzettel is like, so Zettel means schedule, notes, some things written down on a sheet of paper. They could be like Schedule 1 drugs, right? Like that idea of a legal schedule. Like that's tied into a Zettel,
but it's also a mnemonic device that you use for learning, right?
Like, so in the
like every good boy does fine in music.
Sure, yeah. So as I was going to say, like in the Meistersong, you have these Schulzettels that are essentially like the tablature and all, like essentially all the music notation and the notes you need to sing songs for. Like to be in this group, you need to know all these things because these are the standards and this is how we do them and blah, blah, blah. These are the rules. And once you can perform this thing, so there's a thing between you know how there's often like a connection between Ehren and Recht. So Ehren being honor and your rights. But there's another thing between these like Zettels and and then what is like your Schulrecht, which like modernly these are your school regulations, like literally like what runs your school system.
Yeah.
But back in the day, your Schulrecht was literally like, so Hans Mettel, who was a glossator of the Zettel in the 16th century.
Can we call him a fencing master?
Oh yeah, absolutely. A Griesvartel,
book author.
So yeah, he was also a Griesvartel for.
What's that mean?
That is a judicial, essentially a referee for a judicial duel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So he ran those. There's a famous one. The actual name of the person is escaping me, but I'll come back to it. But anyway, where's I going with this? He calls them when he talks about the Hans Seidenfeiden, who is one of the members of the Gesellschaft Lichtenauer. he talks about Schulrecht, which is like his schedule of things that you have to learn, right? And he does, and he differentiates. Hans Mettel differentiates his own teachings from Hans Seidenfaden's, who was also someone he esteemed and was part of his lineage. As far as we understand,
in the 13th century, because of constant conflicts with the church and with the local prelates, a lot of the cities where we find these fight books and these fencing masters were free imperial cities, and a lot of them had won their independence from a local bishop and so on. And because of the strife with the church, they used to rely on the Dominican order largely to run the schools, like for the kids, because they needed everybody to be able to read and write to work in the town. And they started creating new schools that were run by the cities, and those were called song schools because everything was a song. So everything was just like a Schulrecht, that the kids would sing that in the morning. And that was all the stuff they had to learn and had to understand and had to do and had to stick by. Yeah. The other thing I would also say in terms of Schulrecht, as it translates to universities, is that people, but a lot of maybe other people listening to this might not, is that in the Middle Ages, universities had their own law. So if you were a student and you got in trouble, which happened all the time, because they were horrible people, most of them, seems like, as students often are today, but, think spring break, right? But those people would get into lots of trouble. The schools had their own courts. In fact, Philip Martins, Portugal, a fencer, and he's also one of the HEMA guys and connected with the Brescia sort of cathedral of HEMA that's over there.
Yeah.
He sent me a picture of the jail at the I think it was in Lisbon, but one of the Portuguese towns, one of the old universities. They had their own court system.
Sure.
And the jail was still not doing your homework, you get thrown in jail.
Oh, right. Yeah. Sure, but then you also got to fire your professors.
Right. Well, yeah, that's the other thing. There's two models. There's the Parisian model for the schools, which is like ours, where the administration is in charge, and then there's the Bolognese model, which was the first university, very closely related to our Bolognese School of Fencing, I think. Something we can discuss more with Josh one day, and Stephen. But that one is run by the students. So like Bologna University had the permanent committee to condemn the professors that was run by the students. So like there's a professor they didn't like, he was going to get tossed out quick, right?
Yeah.
So that's also part of this world, that the church, the town, the university, and the signori, the nobles, all had their own law.
Yeah. When I went to Malaysia, there was a similar sort of thing where there was secular law, there was Sharia law, and then there was tribal law. And so depending on like who it was and where you were, different laws applied in different areas in the same city, in the same country. Like,
that's fascinating. Yeah, that's exactly like, that I've often thought that the Qadi in the Islamic world, the sort of freelance judge, or magistrate, is very similar to the Schafen. In particular, they had something called the Freischafen, which were associated with the Vehmet court and all that. And I think several of our fencing master characters were linked that way to the.
Most likely.
I think Hans Talhofer was, and I forget who else. By the way, another thing I wanted to mention, speaking of Tulane Library and music.
Sure.
The Musica de Camera show that it used to be.
Yeah. It took me a second. Yeah.
We had a wonderful. New Orleans is such a weird place that it's in so many ways it's very provincial, but it's also like super cosmopolitan. It's a small city. It's a wreck. There's lots of backwardness here, but then there's always this like weird creative eruptions, and one of them was this wonderful radio show by these super deep fanatics of what they call early music, which go back from the Middle Ages all the way through the Baroque period. But there's a lot of medieval stuff on there, and I'm having a brain clog right now. But who's the guy that was a link to a bunch of fencing masters, but he was a mini singer or a Meister singer?
Hans Foltz.
So some of his songs are on Musica de Camera on the front page. Wow. And so there's another one. There's like a Raubritter that has a bunch of mini
yeah. Oh god, I read about him.
Yeah, some people sings about all his crimes and like how he feels bad for raping somebody. Like,
It was a dark period.
so
for sure.
yeah, just because I thought it was so weird and interesting, and like now it's useful to me for understanding the context of the HEMA stuff, you know.
Oh yeah. Oh
And
yeah.
also, I have to interject. I was like, I'm at that age where I look back at all the terrible mistakes I made and decisions in my various parts of my life, and why it's not as fun now because I'm old and crippled. And I often say that if I had my life to live over again, and if there's any Jin out there right now that want to make a deal with me, I'm open to
Sure.
this. I was going to be a yoga instructor and a dance instructor.
Sure.
That's what I decided that was my path would be, which I would look down on it. The 16-year-old version of myself would look down on, and it would be a difficult conversation to have with that person because he'd probably beat me up. But yeah, so was it as fun as I hoped?
Right.
Was it great? Like,
You know,
kind of what you are, right?
Yeah, I hear you. Thank you. I know it was a blast. Yeah. I want to get back into the Schulreich thing.
I know we don't have a lot of time. This is gonna be short, so we gotta...
So, but like, okay, so Meyer also talks about the Schulrecht of the ancients, the Alta.
By which he means like the 15th century guys, or are you talking about the classical world?
I mean, no. Well, he means the earlier Wiktenauer guys. So this is here. I'll read a little phrase. This is Schulrecht tun sehen lassen, dass man dies or jenes gelernt hat. More or less, it says do the Schulrecht, right? Like execute, do it, so that people let people see that that you whatever has learned this or that. More or less.
Yeah, so when it's sort of like the montante flourish in the Destreza, where you're like, you do this weird little dance with your sword, and somebody sees that, and it's, I think they have the same in Bolognese fencing. Somebody sees that you did that, and like, oh shit, this guy knows the Schulrecht of this system, and he knows it well. Like, you can immediately tell if somebody can really do that. That's well, and then that would be scary to me.
Yeah, I think that's right. So what I think. Everything that I'm saying today, we say this all to each other all the time, but like everything's provisional, everything has an asterisk to it and footnotes.
Yeah, I was just saying that.
And so please don't take whatever we're saying as like I'm planting a flag and saying things are like.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I'm sorry.
Yeah. We would just have to like talk for an hour about the smallest details so that we could dial everything back. So we need to just sort of like everyone just chill for a few
minutes.
Right.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's a good point to just stop and emphasize, which is that I think to really, the good historians, the ones whose work lasts, do two things. A, they give you their translations. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Hans Delbruck.
Right.
And B, they recognize their limitations and that their theories are somewhat provisional. Again, thank you, Hans Delbruck, half the time. Right. Because that's what makes it. Because a lot of Hans Delbruck's theories on sort of interpretations of his data and everything not aged that well.
Right.
Translations age great, and some of his provisional things, like some of the things where he says, "Well, it could be this, but I don't think so." Right. Well, it turns out it probably was that, and like that, leaving that little opening gives you so much more leeway. You know, the other analogy I use for this is like when I was first studying HEMA, I got 2 dots. I'm like, oh, here's a dot and there's a dot. So it's a line.
Right.
And then I got a 3rd dot. It's like, okay, it's a triangle. It is a triangle. Sure, it's a triangle. And then it was like, okay, I got a 4th dot, so this is obviously a rectangle.
Sure.
Or it's a bent rectangle. What do you call the one that's like that? And then and then it starts to look like a face, and then it looks like some boobies, because
right,
dumb, and then it looks like I don't know, Star of David, and it looks like something just way more complicated than even occurred to me. And you got to be ready for it to make that jump, because it is going to keep changing. And if you're being fair to yourself, but leaving the openings and not being, we were talking before we started this about how like professors that just destroy their career because they take such a hard line. On certain things. We were talking about the Burka Warrior and the Vinland, the Einstein Meadows discovery in Nova Scotia, and a bunch of other things. Like I was talking on the Discord about the fight between these professors that were arguing about the nature of craft guilds and so on. in HEMA, this has gotten a lot of people in trouble. A lot of people, and we're not going to name names because this is a positive, friendly podcast. But people can get themselves into corners quickly, and you can keep justifying. You can take a hard, weird position and then just keep finding, because there's so much data and it's so confusing and it's so convoluted. But try to be open, because I think we both try to do that, right? And we clearly have learned to do that.
Yeah. The thing that I've been sort of my talk that I've taken on the road a lot is about people unpacking their backpacks when they are approaching the manuscripts. A lot of people, when they start HEMA, if they're going to read the manuscripts at all, they're just going to go reach into 50, not 50, but like 50 stanzas in, go look at some play and try and work it out without even...
Yeah, without knowing the 5 words.
Just not even... And they start there, and they get something to work, and then and it just sort of all builds up, and everything is built on all of these built-in preferences and prejudices and things like that, and viewpoints that are thoroughly unexamined and are usually irrelevant to the text.
And they'll end up going way deep out into outlier positions where they're like way out over a deep chasm where you could fall and break your neck, which... Let's do that now. So, all right. We don't want to time. I want to launch into this thing because a lot of us are. You and I have kind of got here a few years ago, and I'm seeing several other scholars who I really respect and like getting a very similar, arriving at a similar conclusion from different directions, which is exciting.
Oh yeah.
Now, and it could get me into a scary Kunsteffektions cult that I'll regret later, but I don't think so. But anyway, so it's the idea that, which is something you kind of brought up to me. Gosh, it must have been 7 or 8 years ago, I think. But the idea that the devices in the German Kunsteffektions tradition, while they may be effective tricks for fighting that you can apply in a fight, and that was kind of my position, like, man, I can make an abscession work, and I love it. But what they really are, or at least as much, if not more, probably more, is a way to teach the underlying system and principles so that you can reconfigure them and apply them to all kinds of other things.
Well, yes. So everything I think you said is true and I want to say that it's not only to teach, but to learn and to examine. So what we're just talking about with the Schulrecht, do the Schulrecht so people can see that you know your shit.
Right.
Right. And so...
But it's not like rote memorization. It's that's a start, and then it's be ready to explore this.
Sure. Well, there's something, a very common thing in martial arts, saying in martial arts circles, everything works in a demo. You can set up a thing to make anything work. And I think that there are definitely pathological ways that you can have everything work in the demo, but there are also good ways, real non-pathological ways
that are instructive.
That are instructive, but also if you do them in this precise way, you can tell what went wrong. They're easy to diagnose, what the faults
which again opens up the principles. You're well, how does this tie into Warnock Indes?
Absolutely.
Strong? So this also brings up another point that I think is really relevant for people interested in martial arts and HEMA is in the let's say the late 20th century and 21st century versions of a lot of the martial arts that come to us from the East.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say also to a large extent classical fencing and even Greco-Roman wrestling to some extent and so on. There are hard and fast principles and a lot of memorization and a lot of sort of hierarchical authoritarian listen to what the master says, listen to what the instructor says, rigidly.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, and this I think is a difference between, this is another thing we had discussed, I posted on social media recently, was trying to articulate this, which is the difference between the late medieval mindset and the way that their books are written, books of instruction, including the Fechbücher, and I think equivalent in Southern Europe too, versus the early modern version where it is much more kind of rigid in its structure and definitive in its underlying. The principles are more specific.
Sure.
And more, a little more rigid. They're like, this is what you do. If they do this, you do this. And whereas if you're looking at 15th century German, which is kind of the opposite of what, this is another thing we've joked about.
Right.
Italian fencing manuals. I'm told not to say manuals. Italian fencing books.
Treatises.
Yeah. Are extremely specific in how they describe their devices and so on, whereas the German ones are a lot more open-ended and vague. They're like, so when he comes to you this way, you can respond, with your point first and your cross up. But if he's tall, maybe you lean in more, or if he's coming very strong, then you can rotate this way or that way, or it gives you. They're very flexible and open-ended that way, and it's a lot looser.
I think
there seems to be superficially maybe
the thing that I joke about, and I apologize to all my German and Italian friends, but if you go back during this period, it seems to me that the Italians then were more like the Germans now when it comes to writing these things down.
Right, because people have changed over centuries and centuries.
And they've swapped cultures.
We joked about that. That's take it probably a little too far, but it's funny.
I know.
It is funny.
You can't see the smile on my face.
Right. But Christians say that as a Venetian heritage.
Yeah. My great grandparents are from Venice.
There's a certain rigidity and a certain formality, and
but lumpers versus splitters. The Italians of the period, at least in these so-called Bolognese styles, or whatever name you want to put on that, like
on the early 16th century. Early to mid, maybe, I guess.
Whatever it ends up being, like. Even
we have to tread carefully because
even Fiore and all that stuff. But like you have a ton of guards. Like and every 5 degrees of angle is a new guard.
And they're very tied into geometry, right?
Sure.
One of the things about Maciek Talaga, who's this very interesting scholar and extremely good fencer in Poland, who did his dissertation on the 3227A.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that he pointed out quite rigorously in his dissertation is that the geometry is actually there in 3227A, and at least that branch of the we can say maybe it's not necessarily 100% Lichtenauer, but it's certainly Kunstfechten tradition. The geometry's there. Like he points out that it's just hinted at and it's sort of alluded to and it's structured around it. It's like, but the same geometry that you'll see even in. If maybe not as much or as rigid or as obvious as you would have in Destrezza or in Italian traditions.
There's a lot to unpack there. First of all, we shouldn't be surprised to see things like geometry,
of course,
and then also music. Vorschlag and Nachschlag are also musical terms.
Yeah. And this is also the period when musical annotation was invented.
Yes.
It's starting in 14th into the 15th century. And then the instruments like trombones and trumpets.
Yeah. So everything was coming out.
Sort of like saxophones and everything.
Yeah, sax is late. But
for a precursor, I don't know what you call them, but they have lots of those keys.
All the woodwinds.
Instruments.
Yeah. So, so we shouldn't be surprised that these things are actually in there. Whether or not the statement about 3227A being in the Lichtenauer tradition or not.
That's me, by the way. That's not anybody else.
That's probably a podcast in and of itself.
I wasn't claiming that it's Lichtenauer, but I think it's like clearly adjacent or next to it or something. It shares DNA, I think.
So this is a good time to talk about the blind men and the elephant. And essentially saying that we are blind men, and this Lichtenauer tradition is the elephant here. That we're all getting imperfect glimpses
different pieces of from different angles.
Yeah. And so, and then, outside of like, even if there were like, let's say there is a Lichtenauer, Johannes Lichtenauer, and
now we're going to have to open up that side of it. Keep going.
But yeah, but if there were that part, if he did exist and he did have a method of fencing, and then like whatever he did was going to be somewhat different than what his students did, and the people who popularized it. And then there is the sort of cultural phenomena that happens after it becomes the ensconced and meshed in with the Marxbruder and the Freifechter and the Federfechter.
So in case there's any non-human people listening to this, which is doubtful, but if there is, so Johannes Lichtenauer is this figure that is enshrined at the center of the earliest, or most of the earliest known fight books, fencing treatises of the German language tradition. And, there is some debate as to whether he was a real guy or if he was sort of an ideal character. I'm leaning toward real guy, especially after some reading and listening to some of Yoeli's discoveries. And I always thought he was a real guy. I just think, it was the debate to me was like, how well documented is he going to turn out to be? If he's 14th century, we might not have that many records. If he's 15th century, there's probably records. Mm-hmm. But and then that spreads throughout Central Europe, in German-speaking areas, but also like West Slavic areas in Poland and Bohemia, and I think in Hungary, and then it gets trendy. Like it started like second half of the 15th century, or maybe the third quarter or the fourth quarter. We start seeing dukes and counts hiring these fencing masters and buying the books and getting books dedicated to them. So that means that it's like becomes so acceptable because we have a tradition, at least from, again, not my area of expertise, but if we go back to the 13th and 14th centuries, there are people who are fencing masters who are associated with judicial combat, and there were even some guys that could be hired to fight on your behalf as a champion, which would often happen when like somebody has a judicial lawsuit with say an abbot or something, who were considered pretty low status. I think they're called I'm trying to remember the term. I remember reading Roland Barthes' essay about this, or he posted a long thing on Scholar Forum years and years ago about it. It was fascinating. But they were kind of disreputable.
Because, they're kind of like carnies.
Carnies and carnies that will anything in the German-speaking zones, anything that really exposes you to serious mortal risk had a taint on it. Kind of like the executioners were literally untouchable. They were like the untouchable caste in South Asia. And anybody that did things that really was like a Russian roulette kind of situation, which definitely, if you're going to fight in a judicial duel for somebody that you didn't really have anything personally invested in, that's there's a taint on that. They look down on that. If you were fighting for honor, that's different. Mm-hmm. So that also dovetails with the whole like development of the sport. I don't know if you know my Moravian friend Petr Turya, but they have a whole like another scene, and this is another interesting angle. I was discussing this with him actually the other day, but like we have this HEMA tournament scene that we've developed since the revival that we're in now. Mm-hmm. That's a 20-year-old revival where we fight it more or less a similar way. We put on the mask and fencing coat and fairly heavy gloves and a bunch of other sort of soft armor kit, and we go at it pretty hard, and we stop when somebody gets hit, and we kind of clobber each other. I guess now they've sort of dialed it down, or it's a little, but
sure.
So Petr Turya has got a network of in Moravia where he lives, and I think also in the rest of the Czech area and up into Latvia and some German towns, I think Bremen and Augsburg, where they do what they feel is more like the original Schulfechten, without any gear, but it's done in a sort of polite way, so it's very skillful. It's very like they're precise, and Peter is one of the most impressive fencers I've seen in video. But they're not trying to clobber each other, and it's a collegiate sort of thing, and they're striking to the highest parts of the body. They're trying to emulate the sport as they saw it, and they're kind of Meyer people, so they're in the time of Meyer. So
Paulus Hector actually, not Joachim.
Oh well, Meyer Jochen Meyer too. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
big time. Yeah, definitely. In fact, I connected Peter with uh, Olivier Dupuis,
Olivier, yeah.
they visited each other.
Yeah.
And Olivier is our Strasbourg-based Meyer expert
I do know.
and saint of HEMA. He's one of the saints. I say.
Yeah.
We have saints and devils and popes.
No, I when I found that
Bishops.
manuscript, the book it was the 1603 book on fencing that had German fencing terms along the Latin with the thing on dueling.
Is that the one you're talking about? The one you found in Italy? That was that might have been a doctor and a woman.
Yeah, so it was probably not a woman. Well, they initially thought, but looking into so the name was Roselle.
Can we talk about that a little?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's been a couple years, but this is I was mining Google Books, and I ran across this phrase. There's a phrase in one of the earliest fact books that we have, or the earliest one we have, 133, and there's a term "cade sub gladio," which means like fall, drop below the sword, underneath the sword, and so I found it in this later manuscript. I was like, oh, look, they're talking about this about 133, and it turns out no. It was out of the University of Jena, and
Which is where?
It's in Germany.
Okay.
Yeah. And the person's name was Roselle. It's totally escaping me now. Napolitano.
We'll put. Is there anything on this online yet? Anywhere?
No, I don't think so. Olivier had one of his students do a translation in French. I don't know if he has.
Ask him. Yeah,
Yeah. Whatever happened to? But
if there is something, I'll put it in the notes.
But long story short, if you look at the grammar, like everything is declined masculine and not feminine. So we're going to assume that the author is a man. Is a man.
But in the physician angle, was there a physician angle?
No, just school law.
Hallucinated that.
Okay. Yeah. So because I like the first third of it is like a treatise on the right to self-defense. And then it goes into fencing terms in much nicer Latin than I'm really good at really shitty medieval Latin.
Right.
Just the like people are trying to write whatever their language is in using Latin terms. Yeah. Like that's my Latin.
Right.
So
it's like you good university Latin.
Yeah. And I was looking at it, I was like, okay. Like I have to this is going to require me to go back to like Cicero.
But it was in an Italian context.
No, it was German.
Oh, it was German. Okay,
it was German, but it was written.
Story of this.
It was written. Backward. Yeah, it was written in Latin, and then there were parallel passages in German, and like duplier, like terms like duplieren, which is a German fencing term, and others sort of percolate through the manuscript. Totally amazing find. A little outside of my it's a rapier manuscript.
So you turned it over to some other people.
The other people, that are better suited for it.
If I can find anything where this is online, I'll put links in the comments.
Yep. So, but yeah.
Man, I can't believe how much I screwed up the shorthand on that. I had it all backwards. For some reason, I thought it was like a doctor from Italy. Anyway, okay, so another discovery, another fight book that has been found, and with a heavy emphasis on the law. I think that's really interesting. You know who Christine de Pizan is?
Yes.
I like to bring her up because she was a courtier intellectual, a lot like
utter badass.
Very, very interesting character whose family came from Venice, and she ended up in the courts of the French king and then also in the Valois Dukes of Burgundy, and made a living for herself as a courtier and as a scholar, and to sort of take care of her younger family members that were with her. Her father died and left her. She was sort of very well educated, but left in a position of having to support herself. And I like to bring her up because she's known as sort of a proto-feminist. She wrote a book kind of ridiculing a lot of the like Dominicans and so on of her day that had this sort of very openly misogynistic attitude. There's a lot of debates about misogyny and anti-Semitism and sort of hostility toward pagans and the idea of whether you could have treaties with Muslims and all this sort of stuff was being vigorously discussed all over Latin Europe at this time. And there's sort of a camp of Dominicans that had all these quotes from the Bible and a lot of these sayings and stuff that were disparaging of women. And she was a better scholar than most of them. And she wrote like this book called this Book of the City of Ladies, which just ripped apart all these. And she kept bringing up all these people from the Bible and from the already legally and scholarlistically acknowledged auctores or expert panoply of people that were, considered part of what you should learn. So she took all the people that they relied on in their scholarship and people that, the great Dominican saints, Albertus Magnus and Thomas Aquinas, and just destroyed them, And so she's kind of like known as a feminist and everything. And a lot of her writing is about the law and how to comport yourself in court and ethics and stuff like that. But she wrote a war manual. And the war manual is about how to take a large, well-built castle defended by 300 people. And she gets into all the technical details. And I think this is very interesting because like our modern intellectual cast in like the West and the US and the Anglophone world and so on, who I honestly not very impressed with in general, but like they're so compartmentalized that we have people deciding policies for us for our war world who know nothing about anything to do with anything military at all. Right. So you have people that say, "Oh, I want us to have a no-fly zone in such and such a place," and do you have any idea what that entails or what the potential consequences of that would be? Christine de Pizan, who is anybody who's aware of her, which is a very small set of our modern intellectuals, let's be real. But if you've studied sort of the history of feminism or something, you probably ran across her. But she knew that, and her war manual, which gets into like how many crossbow bolts you need and how many cannonballs, also has a really long section on the law and how many lawyers you need to hire. Like if you're going to take a castle, you have lawyers. You need like 25 lawyers, and they need to have staff of like 100 people, and you need to, and you're going to be. This is how many lawsuits you're going to have to prepare for and everything, which is a part of this whole world going back to like the Vikings, and of course in the classical world too, where it's lawsuits are such a big part of all this stuff. I know we're running a little low on time, and we at least touched on a couple of things I wanted to get to.
We'll do another one of these.
Yeah, and the purpose here is to introduce you to my fan base of dozens.
Right?
And, this is going to be out here in the Codex Integrum YouTube channel, and I will post some links to some of your translations and so on.
Yeah.
And maybe we got some fencing videos of you somewhere that you like.
Hard.
Well, you're an active fencer and a good fencer, and I know you for a while you had sort of a block on the tournaments, but I think you've overcome that, and you've had some pretty bad injuries in some tournaments, like you tore an ACL.
LCL.
I'm retired from fencing now, so my knees are just.
I haven't done a tournament in a long time.
But you did, and you're good. You're a really good fencer. So I don't know. You might have some videos somewhere you want people to see, but you're also a perfectionist, so maybe you don't.
Sure.
I don't know. But you give me the links, and we'll put it on there.
Fair.
And so that's Christian Trosclair, and this is how we interact, veering from the ridiculous to the ridiculously over academic to everything in between. And because we're from New Orleans, and our secret belief is that Gesellschaft Wiktenauer is a social aid and pleasure club run by the Mardi Gras Indians, and let's go get them is their theme song. Let's go get them. Home. All right, guys. Bye. Type that in wrong.